The officer shot Ronda Rousey right on the side of the road. He thought he had everything under control, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. Watch until the end and write which city you're from. Subscribe if you support justice. The early morning light filtered softly through the windows of Ronda Rousey's California home, touching the hardwood floors with golden fingers. The silence of the house was broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the kitchen clock. Ronda stood in front of her kitchen island, methodically slicing a banana into her protein shake, her movements precise and unhurried. She had a long drive ahead of her, over 5 hours through the heart of the desert to a women's sports empowerment event just outside Phoenix. It was the kind of event she cared deeply about, a place to speak, to mentor, and to stand for something that had always defined her beyond the octagon: strength with purpose. She had turned down 3 television interviews and a product sponsorship this week just to make time for this one. She didn't need more cameras or more exposure. What she needed, what felt right, was showing up for the next generation of fighters, athletes, and girls who were still learning that their strength was not a flaw to be tamed, but a fire to be sharpened. That fire had taken Ronda from back alley gyms in Venice Beach to world titles, Olympic judo medals, and international fame. Now it burned more quietly, but no less fiercely. She blended the shake, poured it into her thermos, and sipped slowly as she glanced at the time. 6:12 a.m. She preferred to drive early, before the heat thickened and the roads got cluttered. She dressed plainly for the road: black compression leggings, a worn gray hoodie, and a pair of mirrored sunglasses that concealed most of her face. She packed a duffel bag with a change of clothes, a laptop, a backup phone, and a small first aid kit, habits ingrained from years of traveling under every possible condition. When she stepped out into the morning air, the scent of bloomin' orange trees drifted faintly across the driveway. She paused, breathing it in. The air was warm already, and she knew it would be blistering by midday. Her black Ford Expedition was freshly serviced, its tires gripping the road with quiet assurance as she pulled onto the freeway. Her playlist, classic rock with a few guilty pleasures tucked between Metallica and The Doors, played low as the suburbs faded behind her and the world opened into desert. The road stretched forward in a straight line, its vastness both comforting and eerie. Cacti stood like watchmen along the hillsides, and the sun climbed higher, bleaching the sky into a flat, hard blue. Ronda's mind wandered as she drove. She thought of the event, of the girls who would be there. Some wide-eyed, others hardened by the world already. She thought of what she would say to them, that it was okay to be angry, that power didn't need to be apologized for, that you could bleed and still win. She thought of her own past, too, of the moments when men twice her size had sneered at her in training camps, or the times interviewers had asked her about her looks before her skills. There was progress, but not enough. She passed the 2-hour mark without incident. A small diner appeared on the horizon, its blinking neon sign barely visible in the sun's glare. She decided to skip it. Better to press on. She checked her mirrors habitually. Years in the public eye had left her constantly aware of her surroundings. At first, she didn't notice the patrol car. It had been following from a distance for about 5 miles, but she hadn't paid attention until it moved closer, edging into her blind spot, then falling back again. Her hands gripped the steering wheel just a little tighter. The red and blue lights flared in her rearview mirror. Instinctively, she pulled over, keeping calm. She switched off the ignition, rolled down her window, and placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel. Every move was deliberate, measured, taught through dozens of PSAs and survival stories. Her heart rate didn't spike, but her senses sharpened. She waited, scanning her mirrors. The car behind her remained still for a few seconds. Too long. Then, two figures emerged. The first, a broad-shouldered, older man in mirrored sunglasses and a rigid jawline. The other was younger, leaner, with a buzz cut and a smirk that radiated arrogance even from a distance. Both wore tan sheriff's uniforms with dark green nameplates she couldn't yet read. They approached slowly. The older one came to her driver's side window. His eyes scanned her face, then dropped to her body, then flicked to the back seat. He didn't smile. "License and registration," he said flatly. No greeting, no explanation, just cold authority. Ronda nodded once and reached slowly into her cup holder where her wallet lay. She passed over her license and federal vehicle registration. Her SUV was registered under a foundation she supported, which sometimes raised eyebrows. The younger officer leaned in from the passenger side window, now halfway open, peering into the car like he was browsing through someone's bedroom. He whistled low, clearly recognizing her. "Ronda freaking Rousey," he said, laughing. "Man, I used to watch your fights. You really know how to choke a guy out?" The older one said nothing. He studied the license, then looked at her again. "You were going a little fast." "I wasn't, officer," she replied evenly. He handed the license back without comment. "Step out of the vehicle." Her eyebrows lifted. "Excuse me?" "Out. Vehicle inspection," he said, and walked around the front of the SUV. The younger one moved to the passenger door, opening it without asking. She could see him glance toward the gym bag. Ronda felt something click in her chest. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was the clean, sharp feeling she got before a fight. Not nerves, but calculation. This wasn't a routine stop. This was something else. She glanced at her phone on the dash and, without drawing attention, double-tapped the side button. A silent recording started. She opened the door and stepped out. The heat hit her like a wall. The sun was high now, and the road shimmered with mirages. The officer, his name tag read Murray, motioned her to the side of the vehicle. The younger one, Thompson, circled around behind her. She turned her body slightly, not out of fear, but to ensure visibility. Murray asked her to place her hands on the hood. His tone brooked no refusal. "What's this about?" she asked, keeping her voice even. "Standard procedure," he muttered. "Got a report about a vehicle matching this description. We're checking it out." Thompson laughed from behind. "Relax, superstar. We just want to make sure you're not trafficking any killer punches today." Her jaw clenched. The humor was veiled threat. They weren't looking for drugs. They weren't looking for anything. They were here because they wanted power. She was a woman, alone, in the middle of nowhere. They thought she would fold. They didn't realize she had never been that kind of woman. Murray began a pat-down without gloves. His hands lingered longer than necessary over her sides, too close to her chest. Thompson moved in, his eyes scanning her backside openly. Her fists clenched. She could take both of them, but she also knew what that would cost her. Headlines, arrest, possibly worse. Still, her limits had a threshold, and it was rapidly approaching. "You're shaking," Thompson whispered near her ear. "You don't look so tough now, Ronda." Her voice was low but steady. "You don't know what tough is." Murray's hand suddenly grabbed her inner thigh. That was the line. Ronda spun. With practiced speed, she twisted away from his grip. just enough to break contact without escalating into a strike. But that small resistance, that slight refusal to submit, was enough to change everything. Murray stepped back, rage igniting his features. "Get on the ground, now!" Ronda didn't move. Her stance was defensive, not aggressive. Her hands were open, palms visible, but in his eyes she had already challenged his authority. He drew his weapon. Thompson took a step forward, shouting something unintelligible. Ronda backed away one step. The shot cracked like thunder in the desert. Pain exploded through her shoulder, hot and immediate. She staggered, her knees buckling, her vision narrowing. She fell. As she hit the ground, her last clear thought was not fear, but clarity. This wasn't about law. This wasn't about order. This was about punishment, control, ego. And now she would have to survive it. Not just for herself, but to make sure no one else had to endure what she was enduring. The taste of blood in her mouth was metallic and bitter as the world tilted. The image of Murray standing over her, gun still raised, imprinted itself in her fading vision. And then, darkness. The sound of blood pounding in her ears was louder than the crack of the gun. Ronda lay sprawled against the rough gravel, the unforgiving heat of the desert sun beating down on her back as the pain bloomed like fire from her shoulder. The shot had been clean, too clean. She had taken hits before, knees, fists, elbows, but nothing prepared her for the sharp, searing bite of a bullet. Her fingers twitched reflexively against the ground, dirt collecting in her palm, her mind racing to hold on to consciousness even as the black edges of her vision started to pulse inward. Above her, Murray's voice rang out, clipped and cold. Suspect attempted to evade, non-compliant, potential threat neutralized, requesting backup. He was already on the radio, crafting a false narrative, his tone emotionless, rehearsed. Ronda's mind sharpened. They were building a lie, and she was the evidence they needed to erase. She knew, in that moment, that if she didn't act fast, she wouldn't make it out alive, not because of some accident or misunderstanding, but because these men had decided she was a threat to their control. Thompson loomed into her vision, his figure eclipsing the sun. He was sweating, his features drawn tight with unease. "Jesus, Dale, you shot her." She resisted. Murray snapped without looking at him. "Don't lose your nerve now." Ronda's body trembled with effort as she tried to push herself up with her good arm. Her right side was soaked in blood, sticky and thick, pooling beneath her like some terrible oil. The pain threatened to tear her apart, but something deeper, something rooted in years of combat, of challenge, of injustice stared back at the fear and said, "Not yet." "Stay down," Thompson shouted, approaching her side and drawing his taser. Ronda did not move. Not yet. She needed one more second to think, to plan, to gather what strength remained. She saw his boot stop just beside her ribs. He knelt down, grabbed her wrist roughly, and began to twist it back. "Resisting arrest," he muttered under his breath. "Bet the headlines won't show this part." She clenched her jaw and let out a shallow breath through her teeth. Her other hand, the one nearer her torso, was inching slowly toward her side, toward the waistband where her keys had clipped her phone in place earlier. She'd activated the recording. She had no idea how much was captured, or if the mic could still pick up from this angle, but she had to believe it was still running, that someone would hear, that someone would believe. Thompson grabbed her by the hoodie, trying to drag her up to her knees. "Come on, get up. Let's see how tough you really are." Her legs folded under her, barely supporting her weight. The desert ground scraped her palms as she wobbled upright. Every nerve in her shoulder screamed in protest, but she grit her teeth and locked her knees. She could still fight. She could still move. She was bleeding, yes, but not broken. Murray stood by the patrol car watching, arms crossed, his hand still resting near his holster. He wasn't helping. He was waiting, calculating. Then Thompson's hand gripped her thigh, not to restrain. No, it was deliberate. His hand slid upward slowly, lingering in a way that ignited fury more potent than pain. Ronda's stomach turned. She tried to step back, but he laughed and jerked her closer. "Where's that fighter now?" he whispered near her ear. "All those muscles, all that attitude. You don't look so untouchable now." Murray said nothing. He watched, detached, as if observing some training exercise with distaste. His silence gave consent. "Let's check the bag," Thompson called over his shoulder. "She might be hiding something." "Strip search," Murray muttered, and for the first time Ronda saw a flicker of satisfaction cross his face. "Right here." Thompson grinned. "You serious?" "No cameras, no one around. You got gloves? I'll hold her." That was it. Ronda's mind snapped into clarity, her body fueled not by adrenaline but by something older, deeper. A fury born of every woman ever cornered, every athlete mocked, every time she had swallowed injustice and stayed silent because the consequences were worse. She acted fast. Her elbow slammed backward into Thompson's face with every ounce of torque she could summon. His nose exploded in a crunch of cartilage and blood, and he stumbled back, screaming. She turned, pivoting on her left foot, ignoring the blaze of agony that ripped through her shoulder. Her fist came up hard and fast, connecting squarely with his jaw. He crumpled onto the gravel with a grunt, his taser clattering beside him. Murray reached for his weapon, but she was already moving. She ducked low, adrenaline dulling the pain. Her foot swept under his stance, catching him off balance. He fell back, crashing into the side of the patrol car, and she grabbed the taser from the ground, aiming it at his center mass. "Don't!" she hissed, her voice raw and cracked. "Don't!" For the first time, Murray hesitated, not because of fear, but because of uncertainty. She wasn't supposed to fight back. She wasn't supposed to stand. His world was built on control, and now, just for a moment, he didn't have it. He lunged. She fired. The taser clicked, and he spasmed violently, dropping his weapon as his knees hit the ground. She didn't wait. She grabbed his wrist, twisted hard, and with a brutal snap, dislocated his shoulder. His scream was hoarse and short-lived. She pressed him against the ground, knee in his back, and yanked the handcuffs from his belt. Thompson groaned nearby, blood pouring from his nose, stunned and still half-conscious. Ronda moved fast, cuffing him with a practiced ease before dragging herself to the SUV, nearly collapsing against the door. She grabbed her phone, still recording. The realization washed over her like cold water. She had survived. She wasn't safe yet, but she was alive. Her fingers, slippery with blood, navigated to her encrypted emergency line. It took 3 tries, but she got the signal out. A single phrase. Code 7. Officer misconduct. Immediate extraction required. She looked back at the 2 bodies on the ground. Murray was wheezing through clenched teeth. Thompson had begun to cry, softly, incoherently. The heat was rising, her vision blurred, but she stood. She stood for every woman who couldn't, for every girl who thought she had to stay quiet. She stood because they hadn't expected her to, and that was their last mistake. She leaned against the SUV, breathing hard. Sirens would come, reports would be filed, lies would be told, but this time there was evidence. Her phone, their cameras, the audio, they were witnesses now. She had forced the world to look. In the distance, the low whine of an approaching chopper began to echo across the canyons. Ronda closed her eyes, the sun burning through her lids, and waited. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired, bone-deep tired, but there was no fear in her anymore, only fire. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades grew louder, cutting through the silence of the desert like a mechanical heartbeat. Dust billowed across the cracked road as the black military transport descended, kicking up clouds of grit that blurred the edges of reality. Ronda stood swaying against the side of her SUV, her breath shallow, the blood soaking through her hoodie now clinging to her skin like a second, searing layer. Her vision shifted in and out of focus, the edges of the world pulsing in sync with her heart. But she didn't fall. Not yet. Not with them still breathing. Murray lay crumpled in the dirt, his body jerking in small spasms as the last of the taser's current faded from his muscles. His mouth was twisted in a soundless snarl, his dislocated shoulder splayed awkwardly beneath him. Thompson was curled on his side, both wrists cuffed behind his back with his own handcuffs, blood leaking from his nostrils into the gravel beneath his cheek. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't surrender. It was shock, the kind that came when predators realized they had become prey. The helicopter landed with a jarring shudder, and the side hatch sprang open before the rotors had even slowed. 3 figures in tactical gear leapt out, weapons drawn, movements crisp and synchronized. Ronda recognized the insignia on their shoulders. Federal Quick Response Team, pulled from the Department of Justice's Internal Affairs Division. Not local, not county. These were the kind of men sent when the rules had already been broken and the damage was too big to bury. The first agent, tall and broad with close-cropped gray hair and a scar under his left eye, approached her cautiously, scanning the scene. His voice was firm, but not hostile. "Miss Rousey?" She nodded, pressing a blood-slicked hand against the side of the SUV to stay upright. Her legs trembled beneath her. Her left shoulder throbbed with every breath. The pain was constant now, a low, grinding roar just beneath her awareness. She had lost more blood than she realized. She had minutes, maybe less, before her body stopped listening to her. "I'm Agent Ramirez," the man said. "We're here under federal order. You're safe now." "No one's cuffing me," she said, her voice hoarse. "I have it all on record, phones on the dash, body cams still rolling, evidence is all there." Ramirez signaled to the others, who immediately moved to secure the 2 unconscious officers. One of them checked for weapons, another retrieved the body cams. A third moved toward the vehicle, carefully collecting her phone. "I need medical now," she added. "Shoulder, bullets still in there, lost a lot." Ramirez turned and barked an order. Moments later, a medic rushed forward from the second chopper that had just touched down, a younger woman in dark green gear carrying a trauma kit. She was fast and efficient, her hands gloved and steady as she began cutting away Ronda's hoodie, exposing the torn, blood-soaked compression top beneath. "Exit wound?" the medic asked. "No exit," Ronda said through gritted teeth. "It's still in me." "Pulse is weak," the medic muttered. "BP's dropping. We've got to move." Ramirez touched her arm gently, guiding her toward the open hatch of the first chopper. "We've got a surgical unit standing by in Barstow. You'll be there in 15 minutes. As they lifted her into the helicopter, Ronda glanced back one last time. The desert stretched behind them, infinite and bright, a stage that now bore witness to something far greater than a traffic stop. It was a battleground, and she had won, but at a price she was still counting. Inside the chopper, the medic worked fast. An IV was inserted into her good arm, fluids rushing to stabilize her plummeting blood pressure. Oxygen was fitted over her mouth and nose, and a blanket placed over her trembling frame. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her body had done the talking already. The helicopter rose with a sudden jolt, and the landscape dropped away beneath them. Ronda closed her eyes. For a moment, the hum of the engine, the soft murmur of voices, the sharp scent of antiseptic and sweat reminded her of past flights, combat extractions, medevac drills. But this time, the war zone was home soil, and the enemy had worn a badge. The medical center was prepped for her arrival. She was wheeled into a trauma bay before the blades had even stopped spinning. A surgical team was already scrubbing in. The lead doctor, a grizzled man in his 50s with a surgeon's weary eyes, glanced down at her with a grim expression. Gunshot wound, left shoulder, entry without exit, he confirmed to his team. Prep for internal retrieval and possible arterial repair. Get ortho on standby. Ronda tried to speak, but a mask was already being placed over her face. The last thing she heard before the anesthesia took her was the steady beep of the heart monitor, stubbornly persistent despite the odds. She woke hours later in a haze of white light and muffled sound. Pain pulsed through her body like waves, rhythmic and unforgiving. Her shoulder was tightly bandaged, her arm braced. A nurse sat nearby, eyes fixed on the monitor. When she noticed Ronda's eyes flutter open, she stood quickly and moved to the door. "She's awake." Seconds later, Agent Ramirez entered the room, this time in plain clothes, his badge clipped to his belt. "You're in recovery," he said quietly. "You came through surgery. Lost a lot of blood, but they got the bullet out. No major nerve damage. You're lucky." Ronda didn't feel lucky. She felt hollowed out. Her body was a battlefield, and the war wasn't over. "Status of the officers?" she asked, her voice rasping. "Both in federal custody," he replied. "Murray has a dislocated shoulder and broken ribs. Thompson, broken nose, jaw fracture, and a concussion. You didn't hold back." "They didn't either." "No," Ramirez agreed, his voice darkening. "They didn't." He stepped forward, laying a folder on the tray beside her bed. "Preliminary findings. You'll want to see this when you're stronger. Internal Affairs had prior complaints on both officers. Sealed, buried. This wasn't their first time abusing authority, but it might be their last." Ronda closed her eyes again, exhausted. "Media?" "It's out," Ramirez said. "Video, audio, your emergency call. It's all over the news. Public response is intense. Half the country is ready to make you a hero. The other half is trying to spin it as an attack on law enforcement." "Of course they are." He hesitated. "There's something else. We found communications between those two and the private group chat with other officers in their department. The content is graphic, sexist, violent, targeted toward women, especially high-profile ones like you. There are indications this wasn't a coincidence. You were selected." Ronda's jaw clenched. "Planned?" "Looks that way. We're digging deeper. DOJ's already involved. You may have just exposed something a lot bigger than two corrupt cops." Ronda didn't respond. She let the words settle over her like dust. All her life she had fought battles, inside cages, on screens, against doubters, against her own demons. But this was different. This wasn't sport. This was survival. And now, responsibility. As the agent left and the nurse returned, she stared at the ceiling for a long time. Her body would take weeks to heal, her spirit longer, but her resolve remained unshaken. She had bled for this, she had nearly died for it. Now it was time to make it matter. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic, quiet and sterile, but behind its whitewashed walls the world was burning. Ronda sat propped up against a series of pillows, her left arm wrapped in bandages and immobilized in a brace, the bruises on her face beginning to bloom yellow beneath the fading blue. Pain clung to her like a second skin, but it was no longer the sharp, feral pain of survival. It was the dull ache of aftermath, of muscles torn, nerves shocked, and a body forced to endure what it never should have had to. Yet pain was something Ronda understood. She had lived with it, trained through it, fought around it. Pain could be a compass. It could be a voice. And now it was fuel. Her hospital room, tucked into a secure wing at the Federal Medical Center in Barstow, had been turned into a command post. Monitors flickered with news reports. A federal liaison sat outside the door at all times. Her phone, locked and encrypted, had been restored to her by Agent Ramirez with the words, "The whole country is watching." He hadn't exaggerated. The footage from her phone had gone viral within hours. Though shaky and sometimes muffled, the audio was unmistakable. The officers' voices, taunting, condescending, dehumanizing, had been captured in damning clarity. The taser clicks, the threats, and finally the gunshot echoed across phones and television sets in every time zone. The dashcam footage, once secured by federal investigators and reviewed, had further corroborated every detail. Ronda had been compliant. Her hands had been visible. There had been no justification for the use of force, certainly not the kind that ended in a bullet tearing through her shoulder. Within 24 hours, major news outlets had picked up the story. Within 48, it had erupted into a national reckoning. Support poured in first from the athletic community. UFC champions, Olympic medalists, and professional wrestlers posted messages of solidarity. Female athletes led the charge, sharing their own experiences with law enforcement, with harassment, with the systemic rot that Ronda's ordeal had cracked open like a blister. Then came the voices from broader circles, actors, activists, even military veterans, many of whom had followed Ronda's post-fight career closely, joining the public cry for justice. But the reaction wasn't universally supportive. Law enforcement unions issued statements defending the officers' right to make split-second decisions. A handful of sheriffs and police chiefs across conservative districts labeled Ronda's reaction dangerously exaggerated and accused her of escalating the situation. The footage, they claimed, lacked full context. Pundits on certain media channels described her as combative, disrespectful, and even aggressive, citing her background in fighting as reason enough for the officers to feel threatened. Ronda watched all of it from her hospital bed with a stony silence. She had seen this pattern before. The victim questioned, the system deflected, the truth bent until it fractured. But this time, the footage was undeniable. This time, she had lived to tell it herself. The hospital permitted her to record a statement on day 3. The video was brief, under 3 minutes, filmed from her bedside with the help of her publicist and federal staff. In it, Ronda appeared with her injured arm visibly braced and her expression calm but unyielding. "I survived because I fought back," she said into the camera, her voice clear and strong. "But I shouldn't have had to. No woman should ever be touched, threatened, or shot because someone in a uniform thinks her power is a threat to their authority. This wasn't an accident. It was abuse. And I intend to hold every person involved accountable, not just for me, but for every woman who doesn't get to walk away." The video hit 10 million views within hours. Marches began the next morning. In Los Angeles, thousands gathered outside the courthouse. In Phoenix, protesters shut down traffic outside the city police headquarters. In Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Seattle, women of all ages took to the streets, many of them holding signs with her face, her quotes, or nothing more than the simple message, "I am not silent." The hashtags #JusticeForRonda and #WeFightBack trended for days. By the end of the week, civil rights attorneys filed a class action lawsuit against the sheriff's department in the jurisdiction where the assault occurred. The suit included not only Ronda's case, but testimony from 7 other women who had filed complaints against Murray and Thompson over the past 5 years. Complaints that had mysteriously vanished into administrative dead ends. Journalists uncovered sealed disciplinary records. Internal memos showed that Murray had been flagged twice for inappropriate conduct with the female detainees, and that Thompson had been reprimanded once for excessive force during vehicle searches. Yet, both men had been promoted, protected, and allowed to continue their work with impunity. It became evident this was no isolated incident. It was systemic. And now the system was crumbling under its own weight. From her hospital bed, Ronda watched the unraveling begin. Each new headline chipped away at the silence that had protected men like Murray for decades. Every interview with a victim brought the truth closer to daylight. Yet, for every article in protest, there were also threats. She received them by the dozen. Emails, voicemails, social media messages laced with venom. She deserved it. She got what was coming. If you come for cops, expect to bleed. Her federal protection detail doubled in size after a specific threat included her home address in California and a photo of her mother's house. The agents quietly relocated her family to a safe location, and Ronda, who had spent years mastering control over her body and mind, now found herself in the unfamiliar territory of relying on others for protection. The thought angered her, not the need for safety, but the reason for it. She had spoken out. She had told the truth, and now she was the one being hunted. But the fury didn't paralyze her. It focused her. By the end of her first week in recovery, she was working again. She met with civil rights attorneys over secure conference lines, giving detailed testimony. She recorded another video, this time calling for national oversight of law enforcement accountability boards. She consulted with female-led advocacy groups about launching a foundation to support survivors of police violence. She named it The Grip, a nod to the control wrestlers, fighters, and survivors alike knew well. The fight to hold on, to not let go, to stay standing when everything tried to knock you down. Federal prosecutors, bolstered by the overwhelming evidence, filed criminal charges against Murray and Thompson: assault, attempted homicide, abuse of authority, unlawful sexual contact under color of law. The charges mounted, each one a brick in a wall that would eventually seal their fate. When Ronda was cleared for limited movement 10 days after surgery, she gave her first live interview. She entered the broadcast studio on crutches, her arm still immobilized, her frame thinner than usual, but her presence undiminished. The interviewer, a respected anchor known for bluntness, asked the first question carefully. "You've been a fighter your whole life. This was different. What made you survive it?" Ronda looked directly into the camera. "I knew they were going to kill me if I didn't fight back. Not just kill me physically, but erase me. Turn me into another headline, another statistic. I didn't fight because I'm strong. I fought because I had no choice. The only thing they didn't expect was that I'd win." The interview aired in prime time and reached over 15 million viewers. She had become a symbol, not because she asked to be, but because she refused to be erased. That night, as she sat in her hospital room overlooking the quiet parking lot below, she received a call. It was from a woman in New Orleans, a single mother who had watched her daughter be pulled from a car and harassed by officers only weeks before. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman whispered through tears. "You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for all of us." Rhonda didn't reply right away. Her throat tightened, and the bruises on her ribs ached as she inhaled deeply. "You tell your daughter," she finally said, "that she's not alone. Ever." The fight was far from over, but for the first time, the world was listening. The morning of the arraignment, the sky over Los Angeles was unusually gray, as though the air itself had absorbed the weight of what was about to unfold. In the federal courthouse downtown, security was tighter than it had been in years. Metal detectors lined the marble-floored entrance hall. Armed officers stood posted at every corridor junction, eyes scanning faces with trained detachment. Outside, protesters lined the sidewalks, held back by barricades and a perimeter of mounted patrols. Some carried signs with Rhonda's face, others bore banners reading, "No justice, no peace," and "Protect women, not power." Counter-protesters stood further down the boulevard, waving blue and black flags and shouting slogans lost in the din of helicopters overhead. Inside the courthouse, the tension was a living thing. Rhonda sat silently in a wheelchair, her shoulders still bound and protected, a dark suit tailored to her frame in a way that did not hide the stiffness of her recovery. Her face was calm, unreadable, yet every line held the gravity of someone who had already died and come back by force of will alone. Her legal team sat on either side of her, flanked by 2 federal security agents in plain clothes. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. The gallery filled with press, public observers, and a heavy military presence. Across the aisle sat Dale Murray and Brad Thompson, both in orange federal jumpsuits, their wrists cuffed to their waists. Thompson avoided looking at anyone, his face still marked by the remnants of the beating he'd received. Murray, however, looked straight ahead, unmoved, eyes hollow behind his expressionless face. He had shaved in jail, and without his badge or uniform, he looked like a tired, aging man. Yet Rhonda knew better. The uniform had never been what made him dangerous. It had only hidden what already lived inside him. The judge entered, and the room rose. The charges were read aloud. Each one fell like a stone into still water. Assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated sexual battery under color of authority, attempted second-degree murder, civil rights violations, federal obstruction, conspiracy. Neither man entered a plea. Their lawyers asked for time to review additional evidence. The judge granted it, setting the next hearing for a formal plea in 3 weeks. But everyone in the room knew the outcome was already taking shape. The evidence was irrefutable, the recordings devastating. This wasn't going to be a question of guilt. It would be about how much rot the legal system was willing to admit lived within its own bones. Outside the courthouse, the crowd surged as Rhonda exited, flanked by agents. Her appearance drew a wave of applause from the protesters, a spontaneous cheer that rose and broke like surf. She didn't wave, didn't smile. She didn't come for celebration. She came for accountability. In the weeks that followed, her focus only sharpened. With the support of legal advocates, civil rights organizations, and a coalition of athletes, survivors, and lawmakers, Ronda helped launch a national initiative aimed at dismantling the exact kind of structures that had enabled her attackers for years. The project, dubbed Justice Grip, quickly evolved from a foundation into a nationwide movement. At its core were 4 legislative goals: mandatory independent review boards for officer misconduct, a federal registry for law enforcement infractions, real-time body cam transparency, and a ban on non-disclosure agreements for sexual assault claims involving police officers. She testified before Congress via a secure video link, her voice steady, each sentence clipped with conviction. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She spoke the same way she'd trained: precise, disciplined, deliberate. Every time a senator or representative tried to turn the hearing into political theater, she brought them back with a simple question. Would you let your daughter be alone in a room with these men, knowing what I survived? There were no answers. Some nodded. Others looked away. Supporters rallied nationwide. Women who had never followed sports knew her name now. Survivors shared their own stories, many of which had been buried under shame, sealed records, and threats. Journalists unearthed patterns of abuse tied to police precincts across multiple states. At least 12 other officers who had participated in the same private group chat as Murray and Thompson were placed on leave. Federal investigators opened a deeper probe. This wasn't just a local scandal anymore. It was a cultural reckoning, and Ronda stood at its center, not by choice, but by necessity. During this time, her physical recovery remained grueling. Physical therapy sessions pushed her to the brink of tolerance. The shoulder injury had done more than damage tissue. It had temporarily robbed her of balance, range, and trust in her own body. She gritted her teeth through the exercises, never showing pain in front of her therapist, but behind closed doors she would sit alone in the dark, her hand clenched in frustration, sweat beading on her forehead as she tried to will her strength back into existence. Her doctors warned her that she might never regain full rotation. She didn't accept that. She had spent her life doing what others said she couldn't. So she trained. Differently. Carefully. She rebuilt the connections between muscle and will, pain and purpose. And though her right arm would never be quite what it was, it returned with enough fire to let her know she was still a weapon. By the time the trial date arrived, her public appearances had become rare, calculated, not because she was hiding, but because she wanted the focus to remain on the cause, not her image. The trial unfolded with brutal clarity. Video after video, testimony after testimony, forensic experts, trauma surgeons, federal investigators. Ronda herself took the stand, walking slowly, deliberately, wearing a dark blazer over her brace, her voice calm and surgically precise. She spoke for hours, laying out the timeline, the threats, the sequence of force, and the moments of decision that defined the incident. The courtroom was silent. No cross-examination could shake her. Thompson ultimately accepted a plea deal. He confessed to his actions, claimed coercion from Murray, cited a toxic departmental culture. In exchange for his cooperation, the charges were reduced, and he would serve a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. Murray stood trial alone. He never confessed, never looked remorseful. When presented with the video of Ronda bleeding out on the ground while he radioed in a fabricated report, he didn't flinch. When confronted with messages he'd written mocking female athletes and referencing teaching them lessons, he stared straight ahead. The jury deliberated less than 6 hours before delivering their verdict. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 75 years without the possibility of parole. Rhonda didn't attend the sentencing. She didn't need to. Her work had already moved forward. Justice Grip was passed into law in 3 states within the next 6 months. Several federal reforms were being drafted under bipartisan review. Her foundation opened a survivor support network that offered counseling, legal aid, and security assistance for women confronting abuse from officers. And Rhonda returned to the gym. Not to fight. Not yet. But to teach. She opened a private training facility outside Santa Clarita, designed specifically for women, athletes, survivors, students. It was more than a gym. It was a space built around the idea that strength, when guided, becomes protection. That fear, when confronted, can be sharpened into skill. She walked the mats daily, her limp subtle but present, her brace still part of her uniform. Young women came from across the country to train with her. Many had never thrown a punch in their lives. Others had stories too similar to hers for comfort. She never asked for details. She only asked that they show up and work. Above the entrance to the gym, in bold, black letters, was a phrase she'd written during recovery. Strength is not silence. In the months that followed, her story continued to echo, not as headlines, but as policy, as grassroots action, as whispered thanks from those who saw her and felt less alone. And one evening, long after the sun had set and the gym had emptied, she stood alone in the ring, hands wrapped, shadowboxing in silence. Her arm ached. Her breath was steady. She moved not to fight, but to remember what her body could still do. She turned toward the mirror on the far wall, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't see a victim, or a headline, or a symbol. She saw herself, scarred, changed, but unbroken. And the fight, the real one, the one that mattered, was only just beginning. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and explore others on the channel. And if you believe this message needs to be heard, share this video with someone today.